Hello, and welcome to today's acrylic painting tutorial. My name is Jessie Robertson, and this is Keep It Colorful. Now, today's project is all about building confidence through blending. If blending has ever felt frustrating or unpredictable for you, this is the perfect painting to sit down with. We're going to practice blending in 3 key areas that show up again and again. Large blended fields in the background. We're going to create round, smooth cylinders for blending these candles. And we're also going to practice round orbs through blending these shiny ornaments. Now, the second goal of today's lesson is really confidence, but not confidence that comes from making absolutely perfect paintings, but real confidence that comes from identifying your pain points and then choosing projects and themes that really help you work directly on those. So if blending is a struggle, the best way forward is to spend some time with paintings designed specifically to practice blending like this one. Now with today's project, I also wanted to help with another common pain point, which is form and correction. So circles and cylinders appear in almost every painting that we do in one way or another. While tracing shapes is always an option, I found in my personal practice that it's incredibly helpful to be able to sketch and correct those forms directly with paint. So today we're going to check our pencils at the door and we're going to work freehand with our paintbrush, using the paint itself to adjust and correct as we go. If a candle starts leaning, I'm going to show you how to fix it. If an ornament feels off or wobbly, we're going to reshape those together as well. Now, along the way, you'll practice basic shapes, strengthen your blending skills. We'll learn useful color mixes for neutral colors, bright reds, and soft shadows for white objects, all inside a guided festive project that's warm, relaxing, and perfect for this season. Now, this tutorial is absolutely free to watch for the next 7 days, so feel free to revisit it anytime this week. If you need longer with this class, you can tip to own it individually for lifetime access for just a few bucks. You can also join our Kick Academy, which gives you access to over 620 step-by-step acrylic painting classes, with new classes, challenges, and guided projects added regularly. Now, inside the Academy, you can filter classes by subject, theme, or skill level. You can upload your work into your own gallery to track your progress and ask me questions directly under each video. We're also developing a dedicated forum in the new year where Academy members will be able to upload their paintings and receive focused one-to-one feedback from me. Now, for our current Kick Academy subscribers, this class is already part of your library, ready for you to revisit anytime you like. You're also invited to join our Facebook sharing group where you can post your finished painting, see what others have created, and feel supported by our lovely, positive community. Now, if you're ready, let's go over our supplies and let's get started. So first, I wanted to mention I have 2 versions of this painting here. And we discussed mixing neutral colors, so we're going to use a limited palette today. I've warmed up the color temperature of the background here for a warm brown, and here I've done a more cool background. So this would be a lovely painting to hang for the holiday season, and it looks so classy in a frame. So you can mix any neutral, whether you have, warm decor like my auntie loves to have. She's got kind of warm squash and burgundy colored walls. I have a more cool color scheme, so I would do this. And we're going to talk more about that as we go. Now, the size of substrate that I used here is a size 11 by 14 inch stretched canvas. But please, this is a very loosey-goosey arrangement. Feel free to stretch it on any size substrate that you would like. Once you have something to paint on, you're going to need some paint colors. So for today's lesson, we will be using a nice bright red. I'm using cadmium red, medium hue. Yellow, cadmium yellow, medium hue. And blue for all 3 primaries. Today we'll be using some ultramarine blue. You can mix your own green out of yellow and blue, but I've got some green out of the tube today. We'll be using Green Deep Permanent, but any green you love will do. I also want you to grab some neutral colors today, burnt umber brown, as well as a little pinch of Mars Black and some titanium white. Along with paints and something to paint on, we're going to use a few brushes today. I'm going to hold them up. If you've got some brushes at home, just approximate the bristle size and shape. Starting with a number 12 flat brush. This is a beautiful rectangular shaped brush that's 3/4 of an inch wide. A 12 flat. Grab a 6 bright. For our little tiny details, some round brushes. I used a number 1 and a number 0 round. If you have a 1/4 inch flat brush, grab 1, or if you have 2, even better. These brushes are super handy. It's a 1/4 inch flat. We'll be working out our fan brushes today, including this bristly fan. And I have a small little fan brush here. Look how small. This is a size 10-0 acrylic fan brush. Now, if you have 1 or 2 wisp brushes, you could use a rake brush or a grainer brush for this as well. But just brushes that have those segments cut out of the bristles, grab them. They're fabulous for adding the loosey-goosey highlights into our evergreen boughs. For blending our background, you could absolutely use a big soft brush like a 12 flat. But another heavy hitter for blending is the mop brush. So I have this mop brush, it's a little bit damp. If you've got a mop brush, grab it, or even old makeup brushes, just something big and soft like this, okay? That's it for brushes. Just a few more supplies you'll need for this class. A big old jar of water for cleaning your brushes along the way, and then you want something to dry them off, like some kitchen towel or an old rag or t-shirt. I always paint along with my little trusty blow dryer. This allows layers to dry really quickly instead of having to wait. And I know acrylics dry much faster than oils, but still if you're waiting 10-15 minutes and 4 layers to dry, you can be sitting around for an hour. So I like to save time with this little fellow. Another handy tool to have is a spray bottle. If you have your paints poured out on a glass palette like I do, you can spritz your paints every 15 to 20 minutes to keep them hydrated. You can even, if it's a fine mist setting, very lightly mist your painting to help with blending large fields of color. So a spray bottle is always handy in the studio. And that's it for our supplies today. So let's go ahead and start step 1. We're going to be blending a large field of color for our background. And once again, I'll show you how to make either the cool brown, or you could warm it up for a warmer brown. You can make this even cooler if you prefer some gray. So let's go ahead and mix this color. Squeeze out for me some of your burnt umber brown. I'm going to do 2 dollops of brown, some of your ultramarine blue, some of your cadmium red, medium hue, and a little squirt of your cadmium yellow medium. We'll also need some whites. When blending a large area, like a large field on our canvas, we want to make sure we have lots of our color mixed. So we're going to mix plenty of our color. We're going to mix all the colors we might be using so that we can add them fast and loose. Sometimes a whole background areas can dry before you have a chance to blend in the next color. So having all colors you intend to use pre-mixed is going to help. Also, I'd rather you have more of a color than not enough. So let's get started. We're going to mix a nice dark cool color. I want you to take 2 parts of your burnt umber brown and mix 1 part of your ultramarine blue. So 2 scoops of brown to 1 scoop blue. This is going to look black, and we'll be using this color in our shadows. It's going to look really dark. I'll do a little swatch on the white here so you can see how it looks on the white. 2 parts brown to 1 part blue. If you feel like your paint's dry on your palette, scoop them back up. You know, they spread out as we mix them, so scoop them back up into a nice little pile for me. Then we're going to make some brownish red. I'm going to take a nice dollop of brown, rinsing my brush, and I'm going to add some red to it, 1 scoop of red. So it's about 3 parts brown to 1 part red. I'll make us a nice reddish brown. Let's also take equal parts brown and cadmium yellow and mix them together. Now all these colors look fairly similar in their dark form, don't they? Like on here, there's not seemingly much difference. Here's the reddish brown. And here's the yellowish brown. But when we add a bit of white to these, we're really going to see the hue underneath the value. So notice in the background, there's a lighter area here and some lighter areas into the table. So if I were to take some of my homemade black and to add a little white into there, you're going to see it's going to look gray. And that's how I created this cool brown, is by adding a bit more ultramarine blue. And look, now we've got a nice kind of a grayish color. So if you want more of a cool brown, we're going to use the brown blue mixture more. Let's add some white to some of this reddish brown. And it's going to be this beautiful kind of chestnut auburn brown color. Seeing that red shine through for this beautiful reddish brown. And let's do the same thing with the yellow brown. I encourage you to grab a small sketchbook, and if you're mixing these colors with me, a goal in the new year, if you don't already have one, would be to grab a sketchbook, even just cheap mixed media paper, and write down some of your favorite mixes. Here's the yellowish brown. All right, so here we go. We're going to start pulling on large fields of color. Grab a brush like your bristly fan brush. Come into some of your reddish brown, the dark reddish brown without the white, and imagine that this canvas is kind of cut into thirds. And let's come across the bottom and let's start building some of this reddish brown. Up. I'll even show you how to color correct along the way. So if you want this, if you start with a nice warm brown like this and you decide you want it cooler, you can actually just mix in, you can kind of neutralize the warmth by adding more of the bluish brown in there right on the canvas. You can wrap around the edges as you go. So if I want this to be more of a warmer color, I'm going to start getting a bit lighter towards the middle. But I'm going to take some of my reddish brown and I'm going to start adding the white to it. And to get a good blend, you want to be grabbing nice large amounts of color because it will dry slower. So add lots of color for me. So this is turning into a nice warm brown. If I want it even warmer, I can start adding some of that yellowy brown. And I'll even take some white, just right on my dirty brush, pulling it in the middle and starting to create that look of it being a little bit lighter in the middle. Now, if I wanted to make this cooler, I'm just going to go right into that dark, cool brown. And because I already have a large field of color, see how it doesn't take much of that bluish brown to gray out what I've already got on here. So you can color correct right on your canvas if you're like looking at it and you're like, I want more of a cool color. Don't be afraid to just start slapping in those values and then either warming up or cooling down your neutrals as you go. And my favorite thing about acrylics is it's sort of never ending. Sometimes I'll even put a warm background down, decide when it's finished and dry, I want it cooler, and then I'll just do a new layer on top once it dries. So you really can tweak a lot along the way. Whatever colors we go with, we want to get these values on and to get a really soft blend, and you can even change the directionality of your brush strokes along the way. We want to get it on while it's still wet. So I added the gray. I am now just adding more of my warm browns because I think I am feeling the warmer colors today. Or if I was making this for my aunt instead of for my own decor, I'd go warmer. So I'm just adding more of my yellowy and reddish browns. No matter what colors you go for, I want you to slap on a nice juicy amount of paint because we'll want to buff it out while it's still wet before it dries completely. You can use any big soft brush to do that. One of my favorites is the mop brush, but you can also buff it out with a brush like this, using the whole fat side, or even the side edge is really fun for scrubbing color. Let me start with this basic brush. You can see a lot of brush marks here. Now I'm gonna hover the edge of it like this. And notice how it's creating this smooth transition. I'm starting in the light color. So anytime I touch the dark, if I come back into the light, it will drag it in. So I might just take this cleaner side of the brush. I'm gonna work inside out. Okay, so here's with this brush. It does create lovely softness. Not quite as easy as the mop. With the mop, I just lay it on and I tickle the surface ever so gently, grab more color if you need it, or more white if you've dragged in too many darks. But you largely want to be working with this brush with no paint on it. Try to get the paint on the canvas in the first go. And now as we blend, we can create softness like this. But we can also change the direction of some of our brush strokes. So let's get it blended. Now before this dries, if I wanted to get this look like them bowing outwards, I would take one of my big soft brushes, and now with it blended, we can start to go like this. If we want our blend to be more like this, if it was a moon, we would change those brush marks to go around before it dries. Okay. So starting with more paint gives us more time. If your room is really dry, add a humidifier because it will greatly reduce how quickly those paints dry just by having more humidity in the air. Get that field of color on. Get it looking soft. You can always add more color in another layer if you need it. Now, before we finish, if your paint's already feeling pretty dry, take some of whatever color you used, your cool color, your warm or reddish brown, add a little bit to the bottom and try to keep it kind of soft, softening into the top, because we'll need this bottom edge to be a little bit wet so that we can start blending into the tabletop. You can use any of the lighter versions of your color to start pulling the tabletop down, and whatever of these you want to do. So if I'm using my reddish brown, I'm going to add a bit more white to make a lighter value. If I'm using my more yellowish brown, I'm going to add a bit more white to make a lighter value. I might go even lighter for the tabletop, okay? Like this. And if you're going for more of the grayish brown, the brown plus the blue, add a bit more white. So you've got a lighter, cool, brownish gray. I think I'll use a combination of these two since I've gone for warm colors. When we want a more controlled line, it's good to switch from a really big brush, like a big flat. Switch from a bigger brush to a smaller brush for a more controlled line. Also, let me quickly buff out this brush that I dropped on there. There we go. So going into my lighter color. The shorter brush allows me more control on the edge. And I want this line to kind of disappear a little bit into the background. So this technique we're doing here is called edge control. So the background, we needed to make it wet again so that we could come up, add a lighter color, and then I want you to take a brush that has barely any paint on it or is even just clean and damp, not soaking wet. And we're going to soften the edge. We want to create soft edges in our paintings anytime something is a little bit out of focus or in the distance, or we don't want it to take focus from our subject. So you can think of soft edges like the part of our vision that is our peripheral vision. It's like if we're looking with our eyes at this candle or whatever we're looking at, like if I'm looking at my palette swatch, all of the other objects around it fade away. And you can notice that, how your eyes see things. And oftentimes artists are trying to reproduce what the eye sees. Make an even lighter version of that color and come down. You can even mix browns, the cool browns with the warms, creating your own kind of custom brown. I've added a bit of my yellowy brown in here. And we're going to leave a little gap at the bottom of this tabletop where we're going to create a bit of a darker edge. The size of this ledge doesn't matter, but the value does. So the light's hitting the top of the table. It's kind of like a 90-degree angle. So this is where the table is bending down. The light's hitting the top. So no matter the color temperature, we're going to change the value or to a darker value of our color. I might actually take some reddish brown and add some of my grayish dark color. Oftentimes when things are in extreme shadow, they can pick up a cooler tint. Less color, less light, less color. And we can work a little bit more slowly now. We have to work quickly for these big brushes. For these big blends, we have to work quickly. For these smaller blends, we get to relax a little more. You can even soften the edge where the dark color meets the light color for now. And as we keep filling in our background, we're eventually going to really lighten this edge, which will help pop out the arrangement. So the background is always kind of informing the foreground. We can use any brush to pull on this highlight, and I do like to get a little bit while we're still wet and wet blending. I like using sometimes a little fan brush like this because you'll notice when we turn it vertically, it's got this really long, skinny edge. So if I were to dip this in some white and use this long, skinny edge, look, it's almost as crisp as a palette knife. And we can come along this table, and I like to think this is like an old wood table, so I gave it some, not a perfect line. I gave it some little knots and divots in the wood. And then I took a little fan brush and I blended some white up into this tabletop so it gets darker towards the wall. And I'm blending in the direction of the object. And oftentimes when we're blending, that's a really great way to insinuate the texture of an object. We talked about this yesterday when we painted a raccoon, and I was like, pull your brush strokes in the direction the fur is going. Today, pull our brush strokes in the direction that the table is going. Once you've got your neutral background on, we're going to let this dry, and we're going to start blocking in our centerpiece. So I'm going to grab my blow dryer and I'm going to give this a blast. I see a great question from Vicky who asks, Jesse, if we paint the warmer background, should we use a warmer green, like a hooker's green, or a cool green if painting the cool background? Now I did the same green for these ones in my warmer and cool background. And honestly, Vicky, it doesn't matter because this is all neutral. I neutralized this green anyway by adding the complementary color in there. So if you wanted a bit of a warmer green, we're gonna tweak our greens to make them more neutral. And just like the background, I'm gonna show you how to mix a warmer green and a cooler green so you can mix and match. And what I really want you to do today is to develop your artist's eye by trusting what your inner artist says. If you're like craving a warm green, there's no green police, there's no wrong green that you can use with these neutral backgrounds, okay? So you're gonna I'm gonna show you some options and you're gonna choose which one you like best with your background today, okay? Now for blending, one of the other tips I like to give is it doesn't all have to be done in one layer. So always, 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 you finish a blend and then you're like, there's still some canvas shining through. So up close, you can see it's a nice start, but I want it to look as good up close as it does from far away. So doing 2 layers in our background really allows us to create more of like a fine art kind of look to our work. So if you, like me, have any areas that are looking a bit thin, a bit wanting for paint, you actually don't even have to cover everything in your second layer. So what I would do is almost do like a wash. Make sure your first layer is dry. And then I'm going to start with my brownish red, and I'm just going to lightly come across this area. I don't necessarily want to do the whole painting, like my lower shelf looks pretty great, but I want to work the upper area. So I'm going to show you how to blend now. We did wet and wet blending, a wet layer into a dry layer. So I've put my reddish brown on to soften this in. Rinse off your brush. I'm going to use my bristly fan. So my brush is clean and damp. So now I'm just going to lightly hover over the edge with some water, and then we can still keep our soft line. And now this is already blending wet paint into a dry background. And now I'm going to do a little more up here. And I don't even have to cover everything. I'm going to add a little water. You don't have to do second layer, but I definitely wanted to show you how rich the blends can be. I'm going to do a second layer and really thin, and I'm just going to scrub it together the same way we did that first coat. Because the bottom layer is already there, there's so much less work to do in layer 2. And already look at that juicy coat over here. Everything's covered versus this one, which is kind of patchy. So I'm going to work from a light color to a dark color, blending my bottom edge up. And again, if I don't cover everything, it doesn't matter because there's already a coat of paint there. I got too much red on. I can color correct right on my canvas just by adding some more brown or grayish brown, bluish brown. You can use a fat part of your brush. And again, if I scumble over this and don't cover everything, it doesn't matter getting that underpainting showing through. And again, you do not have to add a second layer if you don't feel like it. But I love how rich and juicy it looks with 2 layers. Now you can leave it like this, or if you have a big soft brush, like a mop brush, we can just tickle that surface together. I'm just blending in little circles, but again, remember you can, like this one, I came up and out like this for my blend. When you are happy with your background, and you can do your lower ledge if you feel like it needs it. You know, I would recommend doing it, any correcting you want to do. Trusting your artist eye. Just look. If you're like, it needs more paint, you are the master of your own painting universe. So add whatever you want. When you've done any layering that you like in your background, it's time to give it a blast one more time, and let's dry this. So your goal for this background is to mix a brown that you like and get it looking thick and juicy and soft. Now next up, we're going to start thinking about our composition, and we are going to use our paint to directly start placing our candles, which will break down into simple shapes like rectangles, and use paint to turn it into a rounded cylinder object. And we'll do the same thing with these ornaments. We'll place a few of them, the core elements, into the main underpainting, and then we can add more and layer them in, kind of like almost like we're actually building an arrangement by nestling berries and ornaments in as we go. So rinse off any of your brushes that might be sitting in that watery home. Don't let them dry with paint on them. And we're going to mix another color here. Squeeze out some of your green. Make sure you still have some brown. We're going to mix a shadowy green and a shadowy red. So to darken red, there's two ways we can darken red. We can darken red with our brown, or we can darken our red with our blue. We could also darken our red with some green. So if we take a nice scoop of our cadmium red medium hue, I like darkening it with the ultramarine blue. So I'm going to take a little bit of blue and I'm going to mix it in. This is not going to make a purple because cadmium red has so much orange in it. It's a very orangish red. To make beautiful purples, we need cool reds like magentas. Some magenta here. Yes. So magenta is actually a primary color in the CYM color wheel. So this red makes beautiful purples, cool red. This warm red makes brown when we mix it with blue. So we're going to darken our red with the blue. And we'll just do some fun with color mixing while we're here. So red with the ultramarine blue Makes a beautiful burgundy, kind of like a brownish red. I'll use some water to thin this out so you can see the real hue of the paint there. You could also darken your red with some green. So I'm going to take a tiny little pinprick of green into some red, and it's also going to create a dark color, just not quite as purpley. It's going to be even more kind of brown. So this is red darkened with green. Similar, but you'll notice it doesn't have that really purpley mauve to it. Red darkened with green, it's a little bit warmer, isn't it? So it really doesn't matter. Both of these would look lovely, but I kind of wanted to show you the subtle differences in the color. Red and green are complementary, so they naturally turn a nice brown. But again, with the orange and the red, when we mix it with blue, because orange and blue are complementary, we also get a little brown, but that blue is making it like a violet brown. If you've ever been into color theory or color mixing, we do a lot of it in our classes like this. I do a lot of demonstrations because we love color here. If you want a more structured class in the new year, I'm going to have a color mixing course coming out right in January for those of you who've been asking for a while. So we've got our dark red, which is great. It'll be the shadows and how we'll get the cylindrical look to our candles. We're also going to mix a dark green. So take a scoop of your green. I'm using Green Deep Permanent. A nice big scoop. So let's say two big scoops of green. We're going to darken our green with some red, but we're going to have less red than green, so it still looks green, just more muted. So take a little bit of red. So I've got about 4 parts green to 1 part red. Now let's also add a little bit of yellow. So 2 little bits of red and yellow into this green, and it's going to make us a nice dark neutral green. Let me add a bit more red in there. There we go. So this is going to look like a really dark, like a forest green. So here is our green that has the red in it. And when I add that bit of water, you can really see it's kind of a nice muddy green, forest green. And this green on its own is a little bit more vibrant and saturated. So adding a complementary color desaturates a color. So there's the Green Deep Permanent without the red. The red takes it down. The candles in this composition, we're going to use our eyes to block out our composition today. And we're going to find a third. So the candles really sit in the center third of our painting. And the little one comes up about halfway, maybe just a little bit more for the peak of the candle, okay? I want us to sketch this on with paint. And in order to sketch with paint, we need to change the consistency of our paint to make it a bit more like the consistency of some ink. I'm going to start with my purpley red, and I'm going to add a little water in there. And when I'm creating a painting and I know I want something in the middle, I'll oftentimes just kind of hold my brushes above it like this. Instead of using a ruler, I just want to use my eye and train them to find that center third. So somewhere in the center third, and I don't care if you're off, I just want you to use your eyes today. So let's find that center third. You can give yourself a little mark kind of on each side. I'm going to say about here to here. So I'm going to fit both my candles within this kind of area. I'm going to use that dark red. And now we're going to sketch up. Having some water in your paint. And I like to use the edge of the canvas. Let's start by pulling up I might make this one a little bit over to this side. So I'm already kind of correcting as I go. I want to fit 2 candles in here that are about this wide. I'm going to leave this kind of the gap in between my candles. So I'm looking for about equal amount of space on the sides so that these candles can be in the center. Okay, so we're going to start with a rectangle and then we'll turn it into a cylinder. So if you're getting big gobs in your paint, add a bit more water. And whatever your dominant hand is, kind of turn so you can push into it with your dominant hand. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to take the paint and I'm going to come down. And then I'm going to look at it. And I'm like, okay, I've got a rectangle. Now I want the wick to come out of the center. So even if I've corrected my shape, and I'm going to spend some time kind of getting this rectangle the way I like it, you can trace a ruler if you want to. Just use the paint, okay? Let's not use pencils today. Now once I've got this shape, anytime you want to find the center, like for that wick, just visually eyeball the center and come up. Practicing finding centers and thirds is a really handy skill and one that gets better with practice. So come up the center. The tip of the candle is going to be like a little nub like this. I might make this one a little bit taller. So you can make these decisions as you go. My line's not straight anymore, so I'm gonna do my best. I'm gonna widen my candle. So there's 2 things that I can do. I can either widen my candle or I can use my background color to paint it thinner. Here's the center, and now let's bring it down on each side. It's wax, so it's not gonna melt perfectly evenly either, so you don't have to have this be perfect in any way. Now I have this on here. The light in this painting, can you guess, just by looking at it, what direction the light is coming from? If you guessed that it was coming more from the left-hand side, you're right, and you assess that by looking at where the direct highlight is, a little bit more to the left. Because these are round candles, the direct highlight is not on the edge because it's not flat. It's in the middle because this represents the part of the candle that's curving around and is no longer in the direct light of the direct light. It's more in shadow. So now we're going to beef up our shadows. And we're going to come down the right side of the candlestick, just pull in some dark color here. And because this is a cylinder, where the tip starts to taper up, it won't be straight, it's going to be curved. So now we're going to correct this just by kind of curving down like this. Now I naturally have a dark shadow here because I made my candle a little bit wider. If you don't, put a shadow here and here, leaving a large area for light here and a little area for what we call reflected light over here. Next, let's add a little shadow down the tapered part of the candle here and a little bit on the side that's curving away, like this. Now, before this dries, I'm going to take my bright brush right into some cadmium red. And now we're blending. We're blending again. And we're blending in not a large field, but in a controlled space. So we'll want to use less paint. I want you to think about it like whatever paint you put on here, it's got to go somewhere. So kind of think about how much paint you think can fit in that area. Enough to kind of give you a juicy layer, but not so much that it won't have anywhere to go. Using a bright brush is great for blending in these smaller spaces. And just pulling some red right in. We're blending into the edge of the shadow. And with acrylic, we often work from dark to light, meaning we pull in a base coat of these shadows and mid-tone values, and we add our highlights or our lightest colors on top of a dark base. While we're here, rinse off your brush, go into a little bit of white, and pull it kind of towards the left-hand side of your candle and into the top of the part that tapers, and a little bit indicating the area of highlight that is coming up the tapered part. Pull a little white on, and then to blend this in, we don't want to have too much paint. So wipe any excess white off your brush. And let's just soften this in by hovering over it. This isn't our final highlight. It's just kind of starting to build in the lights and darks. So I'm gently hovering around the edges like this. I'm going to top off my brush, and I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm just going to softly kind of hover over this. And same thing up here. The foundation of our candle, the big one. Let's do this little guy. And let's do it the same way. Into the dark red. I like to start with a rectangular shape using the fluid paint. Get it straight-ish. And then find the center of the shape so that we can get into the tapered part of the candle. I'm going to flatten out. Maybe make this a little higher. And down. Now I've got a little line outside of where I want the body of my candle here. And there's two ways that we can correct our shape. Remember, we can go into the background color and paint this out. We could add some greenery over top of it. But another thing that you can do to help correct is, if the paint is still wet, use a clean, damp brush. Push in away from the background. And if the paint is still wet, you can use a clean, damp brush to help you redirect that paint. So I'm kind of pushing into the inside of the shape here. I can even taper this more with the same technique. You just have to rinse any color off your brush in between marks. I'm going to do the same thing over here. If I want to correct this, I'm going to add a shadow towards the right-hand side. And another one on the left, leaving the space just in from the left for our highlights. A little shadow on the right. And let's curve down. Rinse off your brush. And I like building my first juicy layer of red, wet and wet blending right into this shadow layer. Feel free to switch to a smaller flat brush. Look at the load of paint you put on your brush and make sure whatever you see there, like I'm going to paint in this taper, how much paint do you think you'll need to fill in that taper? There's no exact measurement anyone can give you for that, so just trial and error. If you have a nice little round brush, like a 0 round, grab it now and squeeze out a tiny little bit of pure black. We're going to pull the wicks in our candle. To get a really small line, we need to work with fluid paint and a tiny brush. So let's drip some water into our black and then mix it in. It should feel more like maple syrup, like easy to push around. And then I never go right in with my brush. I always look at the tip, make sure there's no drips. And I'll even pinch it down to a fine point to make sure I can get a little line. Sometimes I find it helpful to have a real candle or to think about and try to envision, like practice trying to call into my imagination what direction wicks on my candles go. How tall are the wicks? I want you to grab a 0 round brush and a small flat brush for me as well. Do you remember that gray color we mixed? This was 2 parts burnt umber to 1 part ultramarine blue, and I want you to have some of that color. It's really dark, it looks black. This is 2 parts ultramarine, or 2 parts burnt umber with 1 part ultramarine blue. It's really dark. Add some water to this color because we are going to practice sketching circles. This is a really important shape. Everything from blocking in the body of animals to the human face, wreaths, sunflowers, the base of a snowman. We're going to use this shape a lot. If you feel intimidated by drawing, I want you to practice on some scrap paper for me first. So sometimes I just feel rusty and I will pull out some scrap paper. I'm going to draw a circle with my paint. Different than drawing with a pencil, but anytime we want to correct a circle in paint, we've got to be able to do the same motion, but with this wet medium. So I recommend just kind of starting to freehand circle, correct as you go, make it bigger. You can also use the background to take away parts of it. Sketch the circle. If it helps you, think about 4 points and then sketching them in. You can kind of think of it that way. You can lightly make a plus sign and then go around there. But I recommend just kind of trying to freehand some. I'm doing this with a little bright brush, and I've practiced doing a lot of circles. These don't have to be thin lines or perfect, but you might want to take a minute to look at a circle that doesn't look quite right and think about how you'd correct it. The idea isn't just to be making perfect circles the first time you try. It's about continually training your brain to think about it because knowledge happens over time. It doesn't happen the first time we do it, which is why practice is always more important than for perfect paintings. Okay, so feel free to practice some of those. And now we're going to sketch on a few for these ornaments. You can place yours in different parts than I've put mine, but I wanted to have a big one here, a couple little ones, and this is totally different size because I freehanded it. This candle's a bit shorter, this ball's smaller, this ball's bigger. They're in slightly different places because I didn't use a grid. We're just working from our own intuition and what looks good on our canvas at that time. And I added a bunch of little ones to balance out the big ornaments over here. But let's get at least 4 or 5 ornaments in, and then we'll wiggle the greenery around those. These are totally going to get filled in with light colored paint, so don't be afraid to get in there with the dark color and correct the size as you go. I want a nice big one. Leave a little space on your table. So I want to have a nice big one, say right here. I know I want that to be the bottom. It might cover up quite a bit of my candle if I make it big, but I'm feeling like a big ornament right here. And I know I can use my greenery to make my shape smaller. And if I want it bigger, I'm just gonna trace a new line with this. So there's one. I want a little red one, maybe here. Kind of sitting in a similar spot on the table, leaving a little room for the shadows underneath. So even though my highlight's up here, I know I'm covering this in with paint. So right now, my only job and your only job is to get the shapes where you want them. Maybe we have one beside or even a little bit in behind the candle. So what I'm going to do, because I don't want to necessarily draw over my candle, is I'm going to draw an imaginary line to complete my circle. And I think I'll just do one more little one. And if you don't want to overlap it, just put it beside. I'm going to have one more little bulb, maybe right here. And the rest I'm going to kind of nestle into the greenery that we put on. like using my little mini fan or my whisk brushes to help block in this really loosey-goosey greenery. We'll use the dark color, and then I used a dark cool color. I warmed it up with some warm greens and then some highlights in the final coat. So right now we want to nestle the greenery around the bulbs, fill in the bulbs, and then pull the final highlights over top of our Christmas baubles. We're going to start with this dark green that we mixed, where we darkened our green with a little bit of red. You can change the color temperature with the highlights to be cool like this, or even a bright warm green if you want. So right now, let's go slowly. And I wanted this to be a mix of greens, maybe some evergreens, maybe some holly leaves, that kind of thing. So I was just really abstract with my shapes. And what I really wanted to capture here was more of the motion of how they're gonna kind of sit around this arrangement. So here we go. I'm gonna start in between these shapes, like maybe there's one kind of coming down like this. Like these guys are kind of nestled in here. We'll definitely want to have some greenery kind of coming up in the back of the arrangement. Maybe there's some greenery coming out over here. I'm going to come up on a bit of an angle like this. Maybe there's one. And then you can pull it out like it's evergreens, or just start with the basic shape and tweak it up from there. We want a nice amount of dark green in behind the white bulb. So that the light color pops out. These can fit within the picture plane, or of course, you can have some of the bigger ones run right off the canvas. And by the way, should you overpaint some of these, we'll just come into our background browns and paint some of them out. Okay, what's next? We will definitely overlap some of these. Like maybe some are kind of coming up and over, but I try not to get too heavy into overlapping these evergreens now, because we still have to fill the baubles in. So definitely we want a nice perimeter around the orbs. And then kind of slightly coming up on an angle, these little if it's a cedar bough, you know, it's going to have a different like foliage pattern. So I'm just tapping around. I figure I'd decide what these were later. They can just be abstract, you know, quasi abstract. Working dark to light. Now it's time to dry these greens. We're gonna get into my favorite part. We're gonna add a shadow under these evergreens, getting some really fun, energetic brushworks in here. Then we're gonna add a vibrant saturated layer to the candles and paint in these beautiful white creamy ornaments and the red ones and the berries. We've got the base of our painting here. So I want you to kind of like your structure, what you've got there. And again, if you need to correct anything, remember how we did 2 layers in our background? So anytime, like I had a weird water droplet here, which you might not be able to see from afar, but I can see it up close. It's driving me crazy. So I might try to, we're not going to paint out in white to correct. Almost always the answer is matching the background color as best you can, and then making it match. So you can clean up your candles this way too. If a candle is leaning, if you got too many greens here, I want to take them down. I'm going to try to take it down with my background color. And then I know my paint's going to dry a little bit darker than it looks when it's wet, but I'm still going to try to fuzz this out or even create a unique pattern with the new color, just whatever I need to do to make it look like my correction was on purpose and not a correction, to kind of soften it into the background. That might mean adding a little bit more of the correction kind of around in little dots or marks. But if I add a few marks in this color that's really similar to my background and just make a few bits of texture, it's going to look super on purpose, and no one will know but you that it was a color correction. And sometimes that's where the magic happens. And a lot of times in tutorials, we're doing something specific, like trying to paint a barn in perspective, and it doesn't allow for a lot of this type of imaginative play, and how the magic of painting happens while we're correcting, not getting a perfect painting off the go. And so often I find that when we're doing a class, we're trying to be so specific, we forget that our mistakes are often what makes our paintings become our own and really come alive. So I'm going to give this a blast with our blow dryer and let's get right into those ornaments and saturation layers. Okay, so why don't we work on our reds to start, saturating the candles, and we'll get into the little red ornament. We're going to use some of our 1/4-inch flat brushes, so if they're in the water with paint on them, rinse them off. I like starting with my dark reds, so darken your red either with green or blue or brown or black. There's no wrong way to darken reds. As we've seen, there's just subtle differences in the color temperature, shifting a little more purple or a little more red brown. Okay, well, let's take the dark color, and with this dark red, come around the outside of the ornament. And even though we're going to layer some evergreens over here, I still want you to paint it as a whole circle for me. If you need to correct the ornament, if it gets too big, your background color will help correct that. Make it a little more dark on the right-hand side. Now the reds have to be done in 2 layers to really get all the highlights and saturation, while the whites can be done in a single layer. That's because I want a shadow color in this dark red, and if I try to add the white highlight in here, it will turn burgundy. Take your bright red and add a little bit more of this in the side of the light source, layering right over top of that dark color. And add a little bit, when we have shiny objects, they will have a really bright highlight right where what's called the direct light is hitting it, like here. But they'll also have all of the other lights and reflected light. So light bouncing off this berry is going to create more of an impact on a shiny object than just on one that has a subtle sheen, like a candle still reflective, but not as reflective as glass. So we're going to add a little bit of the highlight color in the opposite side of our glass ornament as well. We can tap a little bit of a highlight in here, but just like this, it's going to shift burgundy, which is why we'll come back in to the red objects and saturate them a bit more in layer 2. We can start building in the direct highlight up here. So a little highlight just on the inside of that circle. Again, feel, you want just enough paint in there, which you'll have to feel out for yourself. And then let's blend at the edge. So just pulling the edge of the white out, and you can go in the contour of the object. So think about it as a circle. You can make your highlights blending in the circle shape, which will help create its form. Rinse off your brush again. And again, this one will turn a bit more burgundy, but let's add maybe a little. It's very forgiving. It could be different shapes depending on what's reflecting into it. Let's add a little reflected light in the opposite side of the direct light source. And then wipe your brush clean and use a clean brush to just feather those in a little. And again, we'll create a more saturated red in coat number 2. Right now we've blocked in the values in a fantastic way. While we're waiting for this to dry, we'll come up into our candles and we're going to do the same thing here. I want you to clean off a brush like a 1/4 inch flat, or just one that fits in the shape really well for you, that you can still control for the larger areas and the fine details like the tapered tip. Try adding the tiniest bit of water to your red paint. And where the highlight areas are, let's go over them with the bright red. And because we've added a bit of water, and because red is just a bit of a see-through color, even when we paint over the shadows, we still see the different values, the lights and the darks. Spend a little time here on your edges. Don't worry about going over some of those greenery shadows. They're just a placeholder. Rotate your canvas for anything that makes getting a straight edge easier. And remember that technique I showed you where you can use a clean brush to push the paint around. So I'm just doing a thin layer of red with a little bit of water in here. So this bright saturated red is a beautiful, vibrant, warm red color. I want to make a lighter red now with just a little bit of white though, so not looking super pink. It should just look like a lighter red. So adding the white in there, it's going to look kind of like a really bright kind of coral red. And let's take this into the place where the tapered part meets the body of the candle. And we're going to just emphasize the highlight areas again in this layer. Pull down right over that first highlight. Add just a little paint for me now. And then before the bright red layer dries, let's just soften this in. Soften by hovering over the edge of your area that you're blending into. Just a little bit inside the edge here, I'm going to come down. And I can see that my candle's tapering in a funny way here as I add this reflected light. So I do need to come in with a bit of that shadow color. And I've got to make it a little bit wider on the bottom. There we go. Just blending in that reflected light. One more final highlight will make this a lovely, bright, saturated candle. Rinse your brush off. Go into a little tiny bit of pure white without any water. Place it right where the direct light seems to be hitting. Up the tapered part and a little bit onto that lip here. Once the white is on, you've got to rinse and tap the brush off so it's just damp and clean. And let's try to go nice and straight. Just sometimes less is more. I'm going to try not to overwork that highlight. This one's direct. This one's just reflecting light from in behind. I think I have too much paint up here. So I'm actually gonna wipe some of it off. I don't have a place for it to go. And then I'm just gonna hover over this edge. And from a distance, this should look like a nice shiny object. Feel free to play with this until it's looking solid and bright. And it looks a little bit dark right now, and that's because we don't have any of the other colors around it. The nice thing about the darker background is it will make the flames even lighter. The nice thing about lighter background, my background's a bit darker here today, so my flames will pop more. The nice thing about the lighter backgrounds is they can show more energy and texture in the wall. Neither is correct. They both just have a different feel. Let's get that saturated red into our smaller candle in the same way. A thin layer of the full saturated red. Use this as an opportunity to correct the forms. If your candle is leaning, you might want to do what I did, which is widening it, or use your background again to get it looking how you like. Taking our light red, creating the cylindrical shape by rounding the tip, adding that highlight into the taper. Down the direct highlight side, just a millimeter or so in from the edge for some reflected light. Rinse off your brush and soften the edges. Control the edge just by hovering over where it meets. Into a little bit of pure white right in the direct highlight area. Easy to get too much paint when we just want to blend a little bit in. It's easy to overwork it. So if that happens to you, we're just going to keep layering and correcting. So mine's blended down a lot. I want to get a little bit of the pure white in there. So I'm going to add an even smaller bit of white. And I'm going to try to just so lightly blend it just a little bit. Now, hopefully by the time we're done our candles, our little Christmas bauble, the red Christmas ornament, is dry. If it's not, let's give it a blast so we can pull on its final layer. We're going to do the blending in this little ornament the same as we did in the candles. Again, only the highlights will be a different shape. And the only difference between blending large areas and small areas is really moving the highlights and shadows in the contour of the object. And of course, paints dry out slower in small areas than in backgrounds. So backgrounds, we tend to work like the wind, and we can use as much paint as we want without fear. In a smaller object, we really want to use just enough paint. And again, that just comes from practice. So little dollop, okay? It's got a bit of water in there. Adding the saturation coat. And just like our candles, it always looks more red when it's wet. As this dries, those darks are going to show through even more. Come into your light red, right where the direct highlight is, and a little where we might say have some reflected light. Once I've got that lighter red in there, I clean my brush off and I just kind of pull the highlight, just lightly blending the edges. Then rinsing the brush into some pure white, and the pure white will just go on the direct highlight side. Take your time pulling in your red objects. When you're done, we are going to use the same neutral browns that we had in our backgrounds, but we're going to lighten the values so that they are a beautiful, they look like lovely shadow colors in a white object. So we're just going to lighten the colors we've already made, keeping our palette nice and harmonious by weaving the background color into, like we put a little bit of red into the green, browns into the white. So kind of weaving our colors into the color scheme creates what's called a harmonious color scheme. Now, before we get into those whites, let's add that shadow underneath our greens. Grab a bright brush, and we can really use any, like in a harmonious color scheme, any of the colors you've got in your painting in its darkest form can be used as a shadow. So I could use a dark red, a dark green, a dark brown, or a dark gray as the shadow color. The value is more important than the color. I'm going to go with the kind of color of the background that I've chosen. Here was more of a gray brown. I'm going to use more of a red brown here. And a nice dark value without any white. And I'm going to drip in some water to help make it see-through. And I'm going to tap my brush off on a napkin, just so it's kind of stained a little bit with the dark brown as opposed to a big gob. And I'm going to do what's called a wash. I want my color to be really thin and just a little bit on my, it's going to kind of create a see-through layer. So I actually might make this a bit of more of the gray color. There we we go. So all these little boughs creating a shadow. I'm going to pull that shadow. I am overlapping my green colors a little to get the shadow in. And you can leave it at that. You can just use your water to kind of blend the shadow into the table. But what I did, just to take it a step further as well, that's still wet, I came into the light color that I had on my table and I pulled a few marks kind of up in between some of the texture of the evergreens like this. And now we're going to do a bit more of a tricky blend. So we've got to get this while it's still wet. And then I'm going to just gently soften some of these highlights into that shadow. I don't want to lose the shadow. I just want it to look like the candlelight is kind of radiating out, and you can even add a bit more of your shadow color to enhance this. So it's a bit more of a staggered shadow. Kind of bursting out in all directions. Anytime we're blending in a small space and we want a see-through effect, it gets a little bit trickier than just doing fields of color, but that's where we can get into these really, really atmospheric effects in our painting. So I want you to give it a go if you feel like practicing this technique. You can even add a little bit more of that really bright white highlight at the table's edge. And the only reason this is tricky is we've got to kind of understand how much paint we need in this area. It's a conservative amount. So any shadow will do. Blend it in just with some water, or you can pull some of the highlight color up in between these shadows to help create a really cool light effect. Not necessary to get a nice painting overall, but it was a type of blending I wanted to show you using washes and directional brush strokes, like a sunburst of light coming from these candles. Now it's time to pull in our white ornaments. So these, you can do a cool white, again, by using the cool grays as your shadows, or you could make it a warmer white. And I've gone for a nice warm white here to reflect kind of the overall warm brown and red color scheme. So for the shadows, we might use some of our kind of homemade gray color. And we will be using really light values of these colors that we mix. So this was 2 parts brown to 1 part blue, and you can make it even, oops, I want it even lighter. For the shadows of the ornaments will be some of the lightest colors we've mixed yet. So if I've got some of this cool gray, I might pull a little bit of this color into the shadow side of my bauble. Right now it's going to look really light because it's the lightest thing on the painting. Shadows are often cool colors. And then I'm going to take either my reddish brown or my yellowish brown in a really light version of those colors. So a really light yellowish brown, or a really, really light reddish brown. And to start with this light yellowish brown. And just by adding more of a warm color, it already kind of comes forward in space. And the upper left-hand side is the light source side of the painting. It will be a little bit warmer versions of those colors. So darker creamy colors or cool gray colors into the shadowy side. Follow the contour of the shape. So round it out. And unlike the red object, we can get the highlighting and the shadows in one layer here. So I might take a little white, and let's say that direct light is coming from above in the left. So right here, you can soften that out a little bit into the contour of the shape. So following kind of these circular shapes, we can add some reflected light on the opposite side into the shadow side. And we'll soften that in. This might even be getting some reflected light from light bouncing off the table. Okay, so now we've got a warm light object. You can still see some of my original cool gray, a light reddish brown, a light yellowish brown. I think I had even more of the cool gray in this version. So you can really play with the color temperature using those neutrals that we mixed. And I'm going to do two more white ones. These ones are even smaller. When blending in a smaller area, I know it seems like common sense, but you'd be surprised how many times I reach for a brush that's far too big for the object I'm painting. So reach for a smaller brush. Let's start with some of those light grays and coming dangerously close to my candle's edge here. So I'm going to try to carefully come down and remembering that this was a whole circle, so using a slightly lighter and warmer color up here. Maybe pulling in a little reddish brown. Or some yellowish brown. Looks really light, but when we get some pure white right in that light source, you'll see that it is not pure white. And let's do this little guy too. Just doing the same thing in this smaller shape. Go into that white, and once you've got a base of these neutrals, add that little highlight. And then a little reflected light on the other side. Now while I'm here, I think I'm going to add a little bit more of that direct bright white onto this red ball too. And now we are mostly done these ornaments. I want us to start getting into our greenery, and then if we want to add some smaller little ones to round out the composition, we can. So I started working with the greenery with this little mini fan brush. You can also use the tip of a whisk brush to help create like easy loose textures. So let's take that muted green that we mixed where we added some red and a little yellow into it. Now let's try mixing 2 parts of this muted green with some white, and it creates a really pretty neutral color. So this was a green we mixed with a little bit of red and a little yellow, really pretty neutral color. So when we add it to some white, it's this almost kind of sage green. And if I use the water, you can really see the hue of this color. So that's this color with the white. This is a pure saturated green, but I love a neutral palette with a single bright pop of color. So that's what we're going for here. We do a lot of really colorful painting, so it's fun to play with a more neutral palette once in a while. And remember where the light source is coming, and that the leaves themselves will cast a little bit of their own shadow. So light's coming down from the top. So we might say, get a little light hitting this bough. And I want you to use just a tiny little bit of paint, like just stain the brush. And this could be a pine bough. So maybe some kind of highlights on here, but then the whole branch might be casting a shadow on some of the one below, maybe just a little light coming through and getting the tip of this leaf. So you can kind of create that dappled look. So I'm basically just kind of tapping over what I've already got on the tops of these leafy shapes. And I'm not going too light with the value of my green just yet. These little boughs could be coming out in a variety of ways. Now let me show you the whisk brush. I know I said you could use it. I was just using the fan brush. If I take this whisk brush, I'm going to just dip the tip into some of this green color like this. And I'll just come in, say, I want to turn this into a little leaf. So I'm going to highlight along the top of it and just pull a few marks down. If I want this to be a leaf or some greenery, if I want it to be overlapping a bit, I might just pull a few up like this. Maybe there's one kind of coming in between these two. I might actually do that with a bit of the darker green like this. So light hitting the tips of some of these. Like a cedar bough might look like this. Like, you know, there's like a single stem and then kind of loosely tapping some little V shapes coming out. If you hate the bottom, like this ball never looked perfectly straight to me. So if I come over the bottom of it a little bit, it's gonna help me nestle the ball in. Well, you know, sometimes you just gotta paint over something that's not working. So we've added this kind of middle value of highlight. Now we can add even more white to this color, and it is a fairly cool color. So if I want to lighten this with this cool color, adding a little water will help this not look too stark. Like it's going to look like a really solid line, but if we add a little bit of water and then tap the brush off so it's just kind of stained with this lighter green, it gives us an opportunity to add a highlight without it being too dramatic. So just kind of tapping in with this. So if I keep going with this neutral color, it's gonna look like this. Now, if you are like, Jessie, I like neutrals, but boy, oh boy, do I love saturated, bright, garland green even better. So to do that, we just want to warm up this green. So you can either use Hooker's green, which is warmer to start, or by adding yellow to almost any green, you can make it brighter. So if I take some of this cool green and I add, say, an equal amount of yellow, now we've got a warm yellowy green, a grass green. So I took this color, Green Deep Permanent, and I went equal parts into the yellow. So for the person that just needs some saturated warm green in their painting, if I thin this out, you can really see that beautiful warmth to it. This is the color, and to make it a highlight, you just add just a tiny bit of white. You don't need much. And the white will make it really light, really vibrant, and really opaque. So stick with the neutrals like I did, or layer in some of those really vibrant greens. It's up to you. I'm going to stick with the neutrals for now. And you don't have to do anything fancy. take a color that's just a little bit lighter and just kind of tap some marks with a whisk brush or a fan in that direction. And it's going to look, if you're like, I don't know how to make abstract foliage. Well, these could really be any kind of leaf. So if you just kind of tap in the direction of these big spears we have coming out, it's going to start to look like foliage. So like a little cedar might look, a sprig might look more like this. You know, or just like here I pull in some little V shapes off of a line like it's a pine bough. If it's a holly leaf, it might look more like solid and pointy edges. Because I added water, these will dry a little bit darker than they look. And sometimes they'll glaze in a little bit of the more saturated greens. And the size of your whisk brush will create different textures too. So this is the super big one. It's almost an inch wide, like it's wider than my thumb. So I might just, here's just a few bits of bright green here and there, maybe. Play with those highlights as much as you want. Build into the lights slowly. That way you won't be overwhelmed with too many highlights. Like I might want to take some of these down. I'll see how they dry. They might dry darker than they look here when they're wet. So see, they're wet and looking really light, but I think they're going to dry a bit darker. While I'm waiting for those to dry, I'm going to take my smallest 0 round brush and I want to put a topper on this one ornament here. So I'm going to come in here, kind of right overlapping the candle and the ornament. I'm going to pull on this shape in black right on top like this. And when it dries, we'll give it a silver texture. Lisa just said, I've been painting 1 year this month with you, Jessie, and my painting skills have improved tremendously, all because of your teaching. Well, I will say thank you, of course, but honestly, it's the effort you put in as well. Like, no matter how good of a tutorial or lessons we have, if you don't put in the effort and spend time thinking about painting when you're looking at objects, that doesn't happen. So as you're developing your own style and learning these skills and thinking about it, all that effort is 100% you. While we're waiting for some of this foliage to dry, let's go ahead and pull in the candle. The flame isn't just yellow and it isn't just white, it's a combination of both. You look at where a flame kind of bends over a candle, you'll see a little bit of a blue or a warmer yellow there, and it often gets lighter towards the center and the tip. So the whitest part of the flame is the hottest, and then a little bit cooler as it kind of bends up and around the wick. So I started with a kind of yellowy orange, light yellow, and then we'll layer some white in there. Again, working dark from light, even to in the whitest elements of our paintings. This is one of the very last steps. Make sure you have some clean white and some clean yellow for this. And mix just a tiny bit of yellow into your white. This should look like a really pale buttery yellow. I'll put a swatch on the white here. So here's my pale buttery yellow. And once I've mixed my color, I actually like using a little flat brush for flames, but you may prefer a round brush. Make sure your brush is really clean so we're not transferring any of our background colors in here. Come into your light yellow. And I'm going to bend this yellow around the wick. And I'm going to pull it up into a flame. So it's going to kind of taper up. And next, bending around the wick, coming really close to it. And then it'll taper up. When this yellow layer dries, we'll add some pure white in there. So I don't know about you, but my foliage and the black base to my bauble topper is still wet. Let's give this a blast. We're into our final tweaky deakies. I want to make a silvery color, so you can use your homemade gray color and a really light color, or you can mix some white with some black, which is what I'm going to do. Black, it often is very blue shifted, so it makes a very blue-gray. And I'm going to make kind of a medium blue-gray color to start. And I want this to have that old real metal ornament kind of feel. So there's the top. It's a little kind of oval shape with a little round brush. And then we'll pull the metal. It always kind of bends down, leave a few gaps. There we go, like this. And I want to do a little tiny kind of circle shape. And I gotta add some water in my paint to really get that small line. I'm gonna pinch my brush down, making sure I have one that has a really pointy tip. So I've got to be able to make a small kind of circle shape with it. A little water. I'm actually gonna lighten this gray now, so it really pops out. Then I'm gonna add that water. There we go. And I'm going to do a little hoop. In a really light gray color. And I'm going to take a little bit of pure white. Coming right along, just like we did with the candles, kind of showing the curvature of the ornament topper and those little highlights on the side with the most light. Give it a little detail. While we're working in the white, make sure your brush is super clean of any gray. Keep getting some mystery blue on my brush. I have no idea where that's coming from. Okay, look at your brush. Grab some white and leave a little bit of the yellow around the flame. Do a kind of little arc with the white and blend it up into the yellow. If you want, you can come back into some of that yellow color and add a little bit more in the center or at the very tip of the flame. So the whitest part, do a little rainbow around the wick, blending into the white. So we're still blending, it's just in a small space. Very small, so just a little bit of paint on the tip. Okay. Now, every time we add a new element, it changes others. So I was really distracted by how light these evergreen boughs looked. And now that I have my flames on, they are just taking all the visual attention. So I don't even notice the highlights in these greens anymore. I was going to correct them, which is why I recommend when you're doing your final tweaks, make sure all the elements are in there because they will, of course, play with how we perceive color in the painting. So leave those final tweaks so everything is on. At this point, I will do any final highlighting in my evergreens, and I like to add a few little berries and baubles throughout. You can add some white ones. I added just a few red ones in here. And I did it just with the plain red. Maybe adding one, just a thin coat. Practicing those circles, again, really helpful. 2, 3. The background's so dark, it will help us get those shadow values in here. Maybe 4. There we go. And let's use this little round brush to add some berry clusters as well. So anywhere you want a nice pop of red, just come in and tap in some of those little berries. Like maybe there's some sitting on the table down here. They always look really bright when you first put them on, but again, they will become a bit more see-through and the background color will show through, darkening them. I'm going to come in with my light red. Into the tops of these red shapes where the direct light is hitting. A little bit of reflected light on the opposite side. And I'm doing this all wet and wet, right into some white. Doop, doop. Tap it in. If you overblend it, just add some more. And I even take a little bit of white or some really light red, and I'll tap a little highlight into some of my berries that I really want to pop or look a bit more like frosty like. Any final tweaks, do them now. When you feel like you're finished, sit back, relax, and roll your shoulders because you just finished painting Evergreen Glow. If you have any questions for me, I'm going to hang out for a few moments. And of course, I will be back next weekend with 2 new acrylic painting tutorials. I try different styles, different subjects, animals, landscapes, palette knife painting. We sometimes use a grid and do very detailed drawing. Other times we go loosey-goosey like this. And I really want you to be able to pick up the fundamentals of acrylic painting in guided sessions that kind of handle individual pain points, or that's another way of saying things you'd like to learn in guided projects one at a time. So I really hope that this particular project helped you feel more confident with blending, creating form, and correcting as you go. These skills take time, and the growth comes from sitting down and practicing them in focused, intentional ways, exactly like you did today. If you enjoyed this class and want to keep building your skills, the Kick Academy is a wonderful place to do that. I have over 620 guided tutorials like this one, regular new classes and challenges. You'll have the ability to paint at your own pace, and it's designed to help you stay inspired, learn the fundamentals, and feel supported every step of the way. You can paint whatever you want, whenever you want, revisit lessons as often as you need. There's a place for you to upload your work and ask questions directly under each tutorial, so you never feel stuck figuring things out on your own. If you are already one of our Kick Academy subscribers, thank you for being part of our wonderful creative space. This class will always be here for you to return to whenever you'd like a confidence boost or some blending practice. Now, if you're watching this during the free week, enjoy. And if you would like to keep this class for lifetime access, you can also just tip to own individual classes, and they're all just a few bucks over on my website. In fact, everything on my website is between $5 and $15. Keeping things affordable and educational is an important value here at Keep It Colorful. Now, when you're finished your painting today, don't forget to share it in our Facebook sharing group. I see every single painting that you post, and it's a lovely, welcoming place to connect with others who are painting along. Now, next weekend, what are we painting? We have a few more really fun holiday themes. We're going to be painting another one in this series. It's totally different than today. We've been working on this series of adorable animals, and I made this owl where we had an owl drinking a pumpkin spice latte. And then one of our members said, let's do a fox drinking an apple cider. So I did. And they also requested a polar bear drinking a hot chocolate. So we're going to do a super cute polar bear drinking a hot chocolate, along with a realistic landscape featuring a winter scene with a mailbox and some little chickadees nesting in the mailbox with snow-covered pines and frosty branches. So a little something adorable and another landscape for you to enjoy. Well, that is it for me for today. Once again, I hope you enjoyed this class. Take care, and until next time, I hope you keep it colorful. Bye.